Hey guys, tonight we begin a new journey, not into the dark forests of the Middle Ages, but into the sun-baked, marble-clad heart of the ancient world, the city of Rome. So, let's once again leave our modern world behind. Find that comfortable position, let the day's tension release from your shoulders, and allow your breathing to slow. Our journey tonight is into a city of staggering contrasts. A city of immense power and profound squalor, of divine temples and overflowing sewers, of unparalleled law and casual brutality. We are going to spend a day in the life of an ordinary Roman, to see the reality behind the legend. Let's begin, not in a palace on the Palatine Hill, but in the pre-dawn gloom of a crowded apartment building in the city's noisy, beating heart. The sun has not yet risen over the 7 hills of Rome, but the city is already beginning to stir. You awaken not to silence, but to a low, ever-present hum. You are in an insula, a Roman apartment block, in the dense, chaotic neighborhood of the Subura. These buildings, often poorly constructed of timber and cheap brick, are packed together, rising several stories high. Your family lives in a single, small room, or cenaculum, on an upper floor. The air is close and smells of sleep, sweat, and the lingering smoke from yesterday's brazier. The first sounds you hear are those of your neighbors, their movements and voices filtering through the thin walls, a baby crying, a couple arguing, someone coughing. There is no privacy here. Your family sleeps, works, and eats in this one cramped space. You rise from a simple mattress stuffed with reeds or wool, and the day begins immediately. The first order of business is a trip to the latrine. There is no private bathroom. You descend the dark, rickety wooden stairs of the insula, navigating your way to the ground floor. Here, you might find a large terracotta pot, a communal chamber pot for the building's residents, or you might have to make your way to the public latrines, the forici. These are long, marble benches with multiple holes, where Romans of all classes would sit together, conducting business and conversation as they attended to their morning needs. It is a social, entirely public affair. Back in your room, breakfast, or ientaculum, is simple and quick. It consists of a piece of coarse bread, perhaps dipped in wine or water, some olives, or a little cheese. Cooking is a hazardous affair in these flammable apartment blocks, so most meals are cold or purchased from the street. As you step out of the insula and into the narrow, winding street, the city hits you with its full force. The noise is the first thing, a deafening roar of life. The ironclad wheels of supply wagons rumble over the uneven stone pavement, their drivers shouting curses. Merchants, from the open fronts of their small shops, or tabernae, hawk their wares, the baker shouting about his fresh bread, the cloth merchant praising his wool, the wine seller offering a sample. The air is filled with the sounds of industry, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the chipping of a stonemason's chisel, the shouts of construction workers on a nearby temple. And then there is the smell. It is a powerful, inescapable assault on the senses. The aroma of baking bread and roasting meat from the cook shops, or popini, mingles with the stench of garbage piled in the corners, the acrid smell of the tanneries, and the ever-present odor from the city's overflowing gutters. The grandeur of Rome is a spectacle to be seen from afar, up close. It is an experience to be smelled. As a common citizen, a plebeian, your first duty of the day is often the salutatio, the morning greeting. You are a client of a powerful and wealthy man, your patronus. This is a fundamental relationship in Roman society. In exchange for your loyalty, your vote, and your presence as part of his entourage, your patron provides you with a small daily handout, the sportula. It might be a basket of food or a few small coins, just enough to help your family get by. You join a long queue of other clients outside his grand house, a domus, waiting to be admitted to pay your respects. It is a daily ritual of dependence and social maneuvering. With your sportula secured, you might make your way to the heart of it all, the Roman Forum. This is the civic, religious, and commercial center of the empire. It is a vast, open plaza, surrounded by magnificent marble temples, soaring basilicas, law courts, and government buildings. The space is thronged with people from every corner of the known world. Senators in their white, purple-striped togas stride purposefully towards the Curia, their meeting house. Lawyers and orators argue cases with dramatic flair before a crowd at the Basilica Julia. Merchants and moneylenders conduct business. You might see a religious procession winding its way to the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, or a military commander announcing a recent victory from the rostra, the speaker's platform decorated with the prows of captured warships. It is a dizzying, overwhelming display of Rome's power and energy. As midday approaches, the heat and the crowds intensify. For many, work is over. The Roman workday is short. The afternoon is a time for leisure, and the center of Roman leisure is the public bath, the thermae. These are not just places to get clean, they are vast, opulent social complexes, open to all for a very small fee. You enter the baths and proceed to the changing room, the appetiterium, where you leave your clothes. From there, you might go to the palestra, an open-air courtyard, for some exercise, wrestling, lifting weights, or playing ball games. Then the bathing ritual itself begins. You move through a series of rooms with pools of different temperatures. First, the tepidarium, a warm room to ease you in. Then, the caldarium, the hot room, filled with steam and a pool of very hot water. Here, your skin is scraped clean not with soap, but with a curved metal tool called a strigil, used to remove oil, dirt, and sweat. Finally, you take a bracing plunge into the cold pool of the frigidarium. But the baths are more than just bathing. They are the Roman equivalent of a community center, a cafe, and a health club all in one. There are libraries, art galleries, gardens, and food stalls. Here you can meet friends, gossip, network, make business deals, or simply relax and watch the world go by. The baths are a great social leveler, a place where the senator and the shopkeeper could wash away the dust and anxieties of the Roman day, side by side. As the afternoon wanes, people begin to drift home for the main meal of the day, the cena. For your family in the insula, this will be a simple affair, more bread, some vegetable pottage, perhaps some cheap fish. But for the wealthy patron you visited this morning, it will be an elaborate, multi-course banquet lasting for hours. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the marble monument and the filthy streets. The crowds begin to thin. The shops are shuttered. For the wealthy, the night is a time for private parties. But for you, in the Subura, the night brings a different kind of life and a new set of dangers. The streets, unlit and unsafe, become the domain of thieves, drunks, and gangs. You retreat to the relative safety of your apartment, securing the door. The noise of the city never truly dies, but it changes its character, becoming a more furtive, dangerous sound. You lie down on your mattress, the sounds of the city and your neighbors a familiar lullaby, ready to do it all again tomorrow, another day survived in the heart of the world. Welcome back. We ended our day in the bustling, breathing city of Rome, a world of marble and mud, of opportunity and obligation. Now, let us delve deeper into the machinery that kept this enormous city running. To understand Rome, you must understand the powerful, unspoken contract between its rulers and its people, a contract famously summarized in two simple words: bread and circuses. This was the formula for social control, the method by which 1,000,000 restless souls were kept fed, entertained, and, most importantly, distracted. Let's begin with the first and most fundamental part of the equation: bread. For the hundreds of thousands of poor citizens, the plebs, crammed into the city's insulae, life was a constant struggle for sustenance. The Roman state, in a feat of logistics and political pragmatism, understood this perfectly. The answer was the cura annoni, the grain dole. This was a system that provided free or heavily subsidized grain to a vast number of male citizens. It was not an act of charity, but of statecraft. A hungry populace was a rebellious populace, and the grain dole was the anchor that kept the city from descending into chaos. To receive your grain, you would present your token, or tessera, at one of the city's great warehouses. The grain you received, usually wheat or spelt, was the raw material of your diet. You would then take it to a local bakery, paying a small fee to have it ground into flour and baked into the dense, dark bread that was the staple of your daily intake. The diet of an ordinary Roman was monotonous. The foundation was this bread, supplemented by a thick porridge called pulse, made from emmer wheat, which had been the staple food of the Roman legions for centuries. To this, you might add some vegetables like cabbage, leeks, or onions, along with olives, figs, and a little cheese. Meat was a rarity. Fish, particularly salted fish from the coasts, was more common, but fresh meat was a luxury far beyond the means of most. Your primary source of liquid was a cheap, sour wine, or laura, often mixed with water. It was hydrating and, thanks to the alcohol, safer than drinking directly from the city's often polluted water sources. This simple, repetitive diet provided the calories for survival, a state-sponsored bulwark against starvation. Now, imagine the world of the wealthy patrician you visited as a client this morning. His evening meal, the cena, was not about survival, it was about spectacle. In his grand domus, he would recline on a couch in his dining room, the triclinium, alongside his guests. The meal was an elaborate, multi-course affair designed to showcase his wealth and sophistication. Instead of simple porridge, there would be appetizers of dormice cooked in honey, sea urchins, and oysters. The main courses would feature exotic birds like peacocks or ostriches, whole roasted boars stuffed with other animals, and fish prepared with fantastically expensive sauces made from fermented fish guts, known as garum. The wine was not the sour swill of the plebs, but fine Falernian vintage, served by attentive slaves. The meal was entertainment, punctuated by poetry readings, musicians, or dancers. This was the other side of Roman sustenance, a world of unimaginable luxury, built on the foundation of an empire's plunder. With the population fed, the rulers turned to the second half of the formula, circuses. Mass entertainment in Rome was a spectacle of violence and adrenaline on a scale the world had never seen before. It was a state-funded industry of distraction, and its two great cathedrals were the Colosseum and the Circus Maximus. Let us first step into the overwhelming grandeur of the Colosseum. Officially the Flavian Amphitheatre, it was a masterpiece of engineering, capable of holding more than 50,000 spectators. As you find your seat, the seating was strictly segregated by class, with the emperor and senators in the front rows and the poor and women at the very top. The scale of the place is breathtaking. The roar of the crowd is a physical force. A day at the games was an all-day affair. The morning might begin with the venations, the wild beast hunts. Exotic animals from every corner of the empire, lions from Africa, bears from Caledonia, tigers from the east, were released into the arena to be hunted and killed by skilled beast fighters, or bestiarii. It was a display of Rome's dominion over the natural world. The midday period was often reserved for the grimmest spectacle, public executions. Condemned criminals, prisoners of war, and followers of outlawed religions were led into the arena for a brutal, theatrical death. They might be thrown to the beasts, damnatio ad bestias, or forced to fight each other to the death. The most infamous form was crucifixion, a slow and agonizing punishment reserved for the lowest classes. This was not just punishment, it was a terrifying lesson in the absolute power of the Roman state. But the main event, the one the crowds truly roared for, was the gladiatorial combat, the munera. The gladiators were a strange mix of slaves, prisoners of war, and free men who chose the life for a chance at fame and fortune. They were highly trained athletes, each specializing in a particular style of combat. There was the retiarius, armed with a net and trident, the secutor, who pursued him with a large shield and sword, the heavily armored murmillo, and the Thracian with his distinctive curved sword. The fights were brutal, skillful, and bloody. When a gladiator was defeated, his fate often lay in the hands of the crowd. They could signal with their thumbs, though the exact gesture is still debated by historians, whether he should be spared for a brave fight or finished off. To the Romans, this was not just bloodlust. It was a celebration of martial valor, of courage in the face of death, the ultimate Roman virtue. If the Colosseum was the theater of bloody spectacle, the Circus Maximus was the temple of pure speed and adrenaline. This was a colossal chariot racing track, capable of holding a staggering 150,000 spectators or more, making it the largest sporting venue in human history. The passion for chariot racing in Rome dwarfed that for any other entertainment. The city was divided in its fanatical support for one of the four racing factions, or teams, the Reds, the Whites, the Blues, and the Greens. These teams were massive business enterprises, owning stables, charioteers, and horses. Support for a faction was a core part of a Roman's identity, a source of pride, rivalry, and heavy betting. On race day, the circus was a sea of color, with fans wearing the colors of their chosen team. The race itself was an act of controlled chaos. 12 four-horse chariots, or quadrigi, would burst from the starting gates, thundering down the long, sandy track. The goal was to complete 7 laps, marked by turning posts, or meti, at each end. The turns were the most dangerous part of the race. Chariots would jostle for position, wheels locking, horses stumbling, leading to spectacular and often fatal crashes. The charioteers were superstars, idolized by the public, earning vast fortunes. But their lives were short. They were bound to their chariots, with the reins wrapped around their waists, carrying a knife to cut themselves free in a crash. Few survived for long. For the crowd, it was a spectacle of speed, danger, and factional glory that provided an unparalleled thrill. Bread and circuses. This was the potent combination that defined public life in the city of Rome. It was a cynical but brutally effective strategy. The grain dole ensured the people would not starve, and the spectacular, state-sponsored violence and entertainment distracted them from their poverty, from the political corruption, and from the loss of their republican freedoms. It kept a million people in a state of subsidized, entertained dependency. It was the price the emperors paid to keep the peace in their sprawling, chaotic capital, ensuring that the heart of the world, for all its pressures and passions, continued to beat. Welcome back. let us leave the roar of the circus and the dust of the Colosseum behind. Our journey now takes us into a realm that is quieter, but no less powerful in shaping the life of every Roman, the world of belief. To understand the people of Rome, we must understand their gods, for the divine was not confined to temples, it was woven into the fabric of the state, the city, and the very heart of the home. Roman religion was, at its core, deeply practical. It was less a matter of personal faith or spiritual ecstasy and more a matter of contract and duty. The guiding principle was "Ut des, I give, so that you may give." The relationship between a Roman and the gods was a transactional one. You performed the correct rituals, offered the correct sacrifices, and said the correct prayers, and in return, you expected the gods to uphold their end of the bargain, to grant victory in battle, to ensure a good harvest, to protect your family from sickness. It was a religion of orthopraxy, correct practice, rather than orthodoxy, correct belief. Showing up and performing the rites correctly was what mattered. The most visible form of this religion was the great state cult. The skyline of Rome was dominated by magnificent temples dedicated to the major gods, a pantheon largely adopted from the Greeks and given Roman names. There was Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the king of the gods, whose temple crowned the Capitoline Hill. There was Juno, his wife and the protector of women, Mars, the god of war, whose favor was essential for a military empire, Venus, the goddess of love and the mythical ancestress of the Julian clan, and Minerva, the goddess of wisdom and craft. Worship of these gods was a public, civic affair. Great festivals, or ludi, filled the calendar, marked by processions, animal sacrifices, and games. A general returning from a victorious campaign would lead a triumph through the city, ending at the temple of Jupiter to offer thanks and a portion of his spoils. These rituals were not just religious, they were political. They bound the city together and reinforced the idea that the success of Rome was a direct result of its piety and the favor of the gods. An emperor who built a new temple or restored an old one was not just engaging in a public works project, he was demonstrating his commitment to maintaining the Pax Deorum, the peace with the gods, on which the safety of the entire empire depended. But for the average Roman, the most important gods were not the distant, mighty figures on the Capitoline Hill. They were the small, intimate spirits of the home. Every Roman household, from the grandest domus to the humblest insular room, had a small shrine, or lararium. This was the home of the household gods. There were the lares, spirits who protected the family and its property, often depicted as two dancing young men. And there were the penates, the guardians of the pantry and the household supply of food. At every meal, a small offering, a crumb of bread, a drop of wine, would be tossed into the hearth fire for Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, whose sacred flame represented the life of the family. The head of the household, the paterfamilias, would lead these daily rituals. This domestic religion was the bedrock of Roman piety. It connected the family to its ancestors and to the divine forces that were believed to govern their immediate well-being. It was personal, constant, and deeply felt. This belief in a world saturated with divine meaning also led to a profound concern with knowing the future and interpreting the will of the gods. The Romans were deeply superstitious, seeing omens in almost everything. A flock of birds flying in a particular direction, a stumble on the doorstep, an eclipse, a bolt of lightning, all were potential messages from the gods that needed to be deciphered. For this, they had official religious experts. The augurs were priests who specialized in interpreting the will of the gods by observing the flight of birds, a practice called augury. No major state decision, whether to declare war or hold an election, could be taken without first taking the auspices. Another group of soothsayers, the haruspices, practiced a form of divination inherited from the Etruscans, which involved inspecting the entrails of sacrificed animals. The size, shape, and condition of the liver, in particular, were believed to hold complex secrets about the future. For a general before a battle or a senator before a major speech, the pronouncement of the haruspices could be a source of great confidence or crippling anxiety. As the empire expanded, bringing Rome into contact with countless new cultures, the city's spiritual landscape began to change. The traditional state religion, with its formal, impersonal rituals, began to feel insufficient for many people who were seeking a more personal, emotional connection to the divine, particularly one that offered the promise of a blessed afterlife. In response to this need, various mystery cults, mostly from the eastern provinces, became incredibly popular. The cult of Isis, an Egyptian goddess, was one of the most prominent. She was a mother goddess who offered compassion, healing, and the promise of resurrection and a happy afterlife to her followers. Her temples were places of vibrant, colorful rituals that stood in stark contrast to the austere rites of the traditional Roman gods. Another popular cult, especially among soldiers, was that of Mithras, a Persian god of light and truth. His worship took place in small, underground temples called Mithraea, and involved a complex system of secret initiation rites and a shared communal meal. These cults offered something the state religion could not, a sense of belonging to a close-knit community and a personal path to salvation. It was into this diverse and competitive religious marketplace that a new faith from the province of Judea emerged, Christianity. To most Romans at first, the Christians were just another strange, secretive Eastern cult. But they were different in several crucial ways. They were fiercely monotheistic, insisting that their God was the only God and that all others were false idols. This was a radical and troubling idea in the polytheistic Roman world, where it was common to worship many gods. More dangerously, their refusal to offer a pinch of incense to the image of the emperor, a simple act that was seen as a basic test of civic loyalty, was interpreted as treason. Their private meetings and their talk of eating the body and blood of their savior led to suspicion and wild rumors. For these reasons, the Christians were periodically subjected to brutal, state-sponsored persecution. For the ordinary Roman, this complex web of belief was the invisible architecture of their world. It dictated their calendar, influenced their daily routines, and gave them a framework for understanding life, death, and the vast, often terrifying, universe around them. Their world was not a silent, empty space governed by chance, but a place alive with divine power, where the rustle of leaves could be a message, a sacrifice could change a fortune, and the fate of an empire could rest on the liver of a sheep. Welcome back. Let us continue our journey, moving from the public squares and temples into the most private, and yet most powerful, institution in the Roman world, the family. The Roman familia was not simply a collection of parents and children, it was a complex social and legal entity, a miniature kingdom ruled by an absolute monarch. To understand Rome, one must understand the structure of the Roman household, for it was here, in the house of the father, that the values of duty, hierarchy, and power were forged. At the unshakable center of this world stood the paterfamilias, the father of the family. This was not just a title of respect, it was a position of nearly absolute legal authority. Under Roman law, the paterfamilias held a power known as patria potestas, or the power of the father, over his entire household. This household included not just his wife and young children, but his adult sons and their families, his unmarried daughters, and, most numerous of all, his slaves. His power was, in theory, total. He had the right to arrange his children's marriages, to sell them into slavery if he saw fit, and even, in the early republic, the right to put them to death. While this right of life and death was rarely exercised in later periods, its legal existence underscored his supreme authority. A son, even if he was a grown man, a respected senator, and a father himself, remained legally under his own father's control as long as the old man lived. He could not own property in his own name. Anything he acquired legally belonged to his paterfamilias. This created a society where generations of adults lived under the direct legal authority of one patriarch. The role of a Roman woman, the matrona, was one of respected subordination. In a marriage in manner, she passed from her father's control into the legal control of her husband. However, a more common form of marriage later on, sine mano, allowed her to remain under her own father's authority and, crucially, to inherit from her own family, giving her a degree of financial independence. Though she could not vote or hold public office, a respected matron was the undisputed mistress of the household. She managed the family's finances, supervised the slaves, educated the young children, and was seen as the guardian of the family's honor and traditions. She was expected to be dignified, modest, and loyal, her virtues a reflection of her husband's status. While legally powerless in the public sphere, a strong-willed and intelligent matrona could wield considerable influence within the family through her husband and sons. Marriage itself was a social and political contract. For the upper classes, it was a tool for forging alliances between powerful families. Romance was a happy accident, not a prerequisite. A girl might be married in her early teens to a man much older than herself. The union sealed not by love, but by negotiations over her dowry. Divorce, at least for the aristocracy, was relatively common and easy to obtain, often initiated by the husband if his wife failed to produce an heir. The birth of a child was a moment of immense significance, but also of profound uncertainty. The infant mortality rate was tragically high. When a child was born, it was placed at the feet of the paterfamilias. If he picked the child up, it was a formal act of acceptance into the family. If he turned away, the child was considered rejected and would be left outside to die of exposure, a fate known as exposure, unless it was picked up by someone else, often to be raised as a slave. The education of the children who were accepted differed starkly. A boy from a wealthy family would be taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. As he grew older, his education would focus on the skills needed for a public life, rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking, essential for the law courts and the Senate, Greek, the language of high culture, and military training. A girl's education, meanwhile, was focused on preparing her to be an effective matrona. She would learn to read and write, but primarily so she could manage a household, and she would be taught spinning, weaving, and the supervision of domestic slaves. And it is here we must confront the bedrock of the Roman household and its entire economy, slavery. It is impossible to overstate the importance of slavery to Roman society. It was not a marginal practice, it was the engine that powered everything. Slaves were everywhere and performed every conceivable task. They were a living, breathing form of property, with no legal rights, considered, in the words of the writer Varro, as talking tools. The life of a slave could vary dramatically depending on their role. In a wealthy household, a domestic slave might live in relative comfort. Greek slaves, prized for their education, could be tutors to the children, scribes, or doctors. Others worked as cooks, cleaners, hairdressers, and personal attendants. While their material conditions might be good, they were still property, subject to the whims of their master, who could beat them, sell them, or kill them with little legal consequence. They lived in a state of constant vulnerability, their well-being entirely dependent on the temperament of their owners. Far worse was the fate of the majority of slaves. Those who worked on the vast agricultural estates, the latifundia, endured a life of grueling, monotonous labor from sunrise to sunset, often housed in barracks and treated as little more than beasts of burden. But the lowest circle of this inferno was reserved for those sent to the mines. To be condemned to the mines, or damnatio ad metalla, was a virtual death sentence. Chained and starved, they would work in dark, unsafe tunnels, digging for gold, silver, or lead, until they collapsed from exhaustion or were killed in a tunnel collapse. Slaves were obtained through various means. They were prisoners of war, captured by pirates, or were the children of existing slaves, born into servitude. There was a vast and profitable slave trade throughout the empire, with great markets where human beings were inspected, displayed on platforms, and sold like cattle. Yet, there was a glimmer of hope, however faint: manumission. A master could choose to free a slave, either as a reward for long and faithful service, in their will, or for a payment. A freed slave, a libertus or liberta, became a new kind of person. They were not full citizens, they could not hold high office, but they were free. Their children, however, would be born as full Roman citizens. This possibility of freedom, however remote, was a powerful tool for ensuring the obedience of the slave population. The Roman familia, then, was a microcosm of Rome itself. It was a rigid hierarchy defined by absolute power at the top, a clear set of duties and obligations for its members, and a foundation built upon the complete subjugation of a vast, unfree population. It was a structure that could be a source of immense stability and family pride for the citizens within it, but it was also an engine of profound and casual cruelty. The peace of the Roman house, like the famed Pax Romana of the empire, was a peace maintained by an iron-fisted rule. Welcome back. We have thus far remained within the heart of the Roman world, the city and the home. But the influence of Rome, its power, and its culture, extended far beyond the Seven Hills. Now, we broaden our perspective, traveling out from the center to the vast frontiers of the empire. Let us explore the machinery that held this sprawling, multicultural world together: the legions, the roads, and the unyielding systems of governance and trade. The primary instrument of Roman power, the engine of both its expansion and its preservation, was the Roman army. Let us travel north, to the cold, windswept frontier of Britannia. Here, standing guard on Hadrian's wall, is a legionary soldier, a man who is the embodiment of Roman discipline and engineering. His name might be Gaius, a citizen from a small town in Italy, who enlisted for a 25-year term of service. His daily life is one of relentless routine and iron discipline. It begins before dawn with drills. He marches, practices sword fighting, and hurls the heavy javelin, or pilum, again and again until his movements are second nature. Discipline is absolute and brutal. A guard who falls asleep on duty could be stoned to death by his own comrades. The Roman army was not just a fighting force, it was a highly organized, mobile construction company. In a single day, a legion on the march could build a fully fortified camp, complete with ditches, ramparts, and gateways. Our soldier, Gaius, is not just a warrior, he is a road builder, an engineer, a stonemason. The very wall he stands on is a testament to the legion's engineering prowess. Life on the frontier is monotonous and isolating, punctuated by moments of sheer terror during raids from the unconquered tribes to the north. His diet is simple: wheat for bread or porridge, some sour wine, and whatever else can be foraged or supplied. He will not see his home for decades, if ever. Yet, he is part of a brotherhood, his loyalty sworn to his standard, the legion's eagle, and to the emperor in far-off Rome. If he survives his 25 years of service, he will be rewarded with a pension or a plot of land, perhaps here in this new province, where he will become a source of Roman culture and loyalty, a veteran anchor in a foreign land. This army, stationed strategically across thousands of miles of frontier, from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Germania, was the glue that held the empire together through sheer military might. But an army is only as good as its ability to move. The true genius of Roman logistics lay in its extraordinary network of roads. The phrase "all roads lead to Rome" was a literal truth. From the city, a system of meticulously engineered highways radiated out to every corner of the empire. Roman roads were built to last, and built for speed. Surveyors would plot the straightest possible course, cutting through hills and bridging valleys. The construction was a layered process, a deep foundation of packed earth and stone, followed by layers of gravel, and finally, topped with large, tightly fitted paving stones. They were crowned in the middle to allow for drainage. These roads were the arteries of the empire. They allowed legions to march at incredible speeds to quell rebellions or reinforce a threatened frontier. They carried the messengers of the imperial post, the cursus publicus, creating a communication network that was unparalleled until the age of the telegraph. And they were vital conduits for trade, allowing goods to move from the provinces to Rome and from one end of the empire to the other with a safety and efficiency that would not be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. Just as the roads carried soldiers and goods, another feat of engineering carried the lifeblood of the cities, the aqueducts. A large Roman city, with its baths, fountains, and dense population, consumed enormous quantities of water. To supply this need, Roman engineers built magnificent aqueducts, stone channels that carried fresh water from distant mountain springs across miles of countryside. Using a precise, gentle gradient, these channels harnessed the power of gravity to deliver a constant flow of water. Where they crossed valleys, they were supported by soaring, graceful arches, many of which still stand today as silent monuments to Roman ingenuity. This mastery of water allowed cities to flourish in arid regions and supported the Roman ideal of a sophisticated urban life, complete with public baths and sanitation, even in the most remote corners of the empire. This physical infrastructure of roads and aqueducts was the hardware of the empire. The software that ran on it was the Roman system of provincial governance. How was a vast and diverse territory like Gaul, with its numerous tribes, or Egypt, with its ancient civilization, actually managed? Each province was ruled by a governor, usually an ex-senator or a man of high standing, appointed by the emperor or the senate. His job was to maintain order, with the help of the local legions, administer justice for Roman citizens, and, most importantly, to ensure the collection of taxes. Tax collection was often a brutal and corrupt business. The state would frequently outsource the task to private companies of tax collectors, known as publicani. These companies would bid for the contract, paying the state a lump sum, and then proceed to collect as much as they could from the local population, their profit being whatever they could extract above the contract price. This system led to widespread extortion and was a frequent source of resentment and rebellion in the provinces. Yet, Rome's rule was not based solely on force and extraction. It also employed a powerful strategy of cultural assimilation known as Romanization. Local elites in the provinces were encouraged to adopt Roman customs. They learned Latin, took Roman names, wore the toga, and sought Roman citizenship, a prized legal status that offered significant protections and advantages. They built their cities with forums, temples, and amphitheaters in the Roman style. By co-opting the local aristocracy and giving them a stake in the Roman system, Rome created a loyal governing class that helped to keep the provinces stable and integrated into the imperial culture. This integrated empire was tied together by a vast web of trade, all of it flowing across the Mediterranean Sea, which the Romans proudly called Mare Nostrum, our sea. With piracy largely suppressed by the powerful Roman navy, the sea lanes were safe for commerce. From the port of Ostia, near Rome, ships embarked on journeys across this great lake. They returned with vital cargo, enormous shipments of grain from the fertile Nile Delta in Egypt to feed the capital's population, wine and fine pottery from Gaul, high-quality olive oil and garum from Spain, marble from Greece, and luxury goods like silk that had traveled thousands of miles along the Silk Road from the Far East. This constant flow of goods was the economic lifeblood of the empire, a system that brought the wealth of the world to the doorstep of Rome and spread Roman products and culture to the farthest provinces. The machinery of empire, then, was a complex, interlocking system. It was the discipline of the legionary on the wall, the straightness of the road he marched on, the fresh water flowing in the aqueduct, the authority of the governor in his provincial palace, and the laden merchant ship sailing across Mare Nostrum. It was a system of remarkable durability and power, capable of holding together dozens of different cultures under a single rule for centuries, projecting the power of a single city to the edges of the known world. Welcome back. Our journey has taken us across the vast physical expanse of the Roman Empire. Now, we turn to what is arguably its most enduring legacy, the vast, intricate, and often contradictory world of Roman law. The Romans were not just conquerors and engineers, they were, above all, lawmakers. They believed their greatest gift to the world was their system of justice. But this system, like the city of Rome itself, was a place of stark contrasts, a marvel of intellectual sophistication for some, and an instrument of terrifying brutality for others. The foundation of Roman pride in their legal system was the idea of written, codified law. Beginning with the legendary 12 Tables, compiled in the early Republic, Romans believed that law should be a known and predictable force, not the arbitrary whim of a king. This principle, however, came with a monumental distinction that defined every aspect of Roman justice: the difference between being a Roman citizen and being anyone else. To be a Roman citizen, civis Romanus, was to be wrapped in a cloak of legal protection. You had the right to make contracts, to own property, to marry under Roman law, and, most importantly, the right to a fair trial. You could not be summarily executed without a judgment. You could not be subjected to the most humiliating forms of punishment, such as flogging or crucifixion. In a legal dispute, you had the right to plead your own case or hire a skilled orator to do it for you. And if you were condemned by a provincial governor, you possessed the ultimate legal trump card, the right to appeal directly to the emperor in Rome. The cry civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, was a powerful declaration, a demand to be treated with the dignity and process afforded by the law. For everyone else, the vast majority of people in the empire, the non-citizen provincials known as peregrini, and the enormous population of slaves, this cloak of protection did not exist. They were subjects, not citizens, and their legal standing was precarious, their fate often resting entirely in the hands of a local magistrate or provincial governor. Let us imagine a trial in one of the great basilicas that lined the Roman Forum. The building is a vast, echoing hall, filled with the murmur of the crowd. At the head of the hall sits the magistrate, the praetor, who presides over the case. The decision of guilt or innocence, however, will be made by a jury, the judices, composed of men of high social standing. The core of the trial is a battle of words. The accuser and the accused hire the best orators they can afford. These lawyers, figures like the legendary Cicero, are masters of rhetoric. They do not just present facts, they tell stories, they appeal to emotion, they attack the character of their opponents, they deploy every persuasive trick in their arsenal to sway the jury. It is a grand performance, a mixture of legal reasoning and high drama. But who enforces the law? Who investigates the crimes? Outside of the army's jurisdiction, there was little in the way of a professional police force. In the city of Rome itself, a force known as the Vigiles Urbani was established by the Emperor Augustus. They were primarily a fire brigade, equipped with buckets, axes, and pumps to fight the constant threat of fire in the crowded insulae. At night, they also served as a rudimentary night watch, patrolling the dark streets to deter crime. But they were limited in number and scope. For most crimes, justice was reactive, not proactive. A victim had to bring a private prosecution against the person they believed had wronged them. If a verdict of guilt was reached, the nature of the punishment depended entirely on your social status. For a member of the upper classes, punishment was often financial, a heavy fine or the confiscation of property. The most severe punishment for a citizen was exile, or exilium. This was not merely being sent away, it was a form of civic death. You were stripped of your citizenship, your property was forfeit, and you were banished from Roman territory forever, forced to live out your days as a stateless person. For the lower classes, for non-citizens, and for slaves, the justice system shed its sophisticated, rhetorical trappings and revealed its brutal, iron core. The punishments were physical, public, and designed to inflict maximum pain and terror. A common punishment was condemnation to the state mines or quarries, damnatio ad metalla. This was a living death. Chained and starved, prisoners would perform brutal manual labor in horrific conditions until they died, their bodies simply left in the tunnels. The arenas we visited in a previous chapter were not just for entertainment, they were places of execution. The sentence of damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, was a popular spectacle. The condemned, unarmed, were driven into the Colosseum to be mauled and killed by starved lions, bears, or other wild animals for the amusement of the crowd. But the most infamous of all Roman punishments, the one that has echoed through history, was crucifixion. This method of execution was designed to be the ultimate combination of prolonged agony, public humiliation, and terrifying deterrence. It was reserved for the lowest of the low, slaves, rebels, pirates, and despised criminals. The victim was forced to carry their own crossbeam to the execution site outside the city walls. They were then nailed or tied to the cross and left to die slowly over a period of days from a combination of blood loss, asphyxiation, and shock. Their suffering was a public message, a stark and visible warning of the fate that awaited those who defied the power of Rome. The Roman legal system, then, was a profound duality. It was the home of sophisticated legal concepts that form the basis of many modern legal systems, the idea that one is innocent until proven guilty, the importance of evidence, the codification of laws. It produced brilliant legal scholars and a body of civil law that was a marvel of logic and reason. But it was also an instrument of a rigid and unforgiving social hierarchy. It codified the absolute power of the master over the slave, the citizen over the foreigner. Its justice was not blind. It saw social status very clearly, and it meted out its rewards and its terrible punishments accordingly. It was a system of both marble and iron, of high-minded principle and low, brutal terror, a perfect reflection of the empire it was built to serve. Welcome back for the final part of our Roman journey. We have explored the mechanics of life in the empire. Now we must confront the mechanics of its end. Every road in this vast empire, whether paved with stone or with suffering, ultimately leads to the same destination. Let us settle in one last time, and travel to the quiet conclusion of a Roman life, to explore how the people of this mighty civilization faced their own mortality, and what they believed lay beyond the dust. In Roman society, old age was viewed with a mixture of respect and pragmatism. The mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors, placed a high value on the wisdom and authority of elders. A man who had lived a long and distinguished life, who had served the Republic or the Empire, was a figure of immense respect. For the wealthy elite, old age could be a time of leisure and reflection, a time to dictate memoirs, engage in philosophical correspondence, or enjoy the fruits of a lifetime of ambition on a grand country estate. But for the common person, old age was not a release from labor, but simply a continuation of it with a body that was beginning to fail. There were no state pensions. Your survival depended on the support of your children, on the strength of the family unit you had built. The respect for elders was tempered by the practical reality that every member of a household needed to contribute. A long life was a victory, but it was also a burden. When the end drew near, death, like everything else in Rome, was a profoundly social and ritualized event. A Roman of any standing did not die alone. The family would gather at the bedside. It was considered a sacred duty for the next of kin, usually the eldest son, to be present to catch the final breath of the dying with a kiss, a symbolic act of receiving the family's spirit and ensuring its continuation. Once life had departed, the preparations for the funeral began immediately. The body was washed, anointed with oils, and dressed in the finest clothes it owned. For a citizen, this was the toga. A small coin was placed in the mouth to pay Charon, the mythical ferryman who would carry the soul across the river Styx into the underworld. The body would then be laid out on a funeral couch in the atrium, the main hall of the house, with its feet pointing towards the door, ready for its final journey. For a prominent Roman, the funeral procession was a major public spectacle, a final piece of theater to display the family's history and importance. At the head of the procession were musicians playing samba tunes. Following them were professional mourners, often hired women who would wail, tear at their hair, and sing praises of the deceased. Then came the most remarkable part, actors wearing wax masks, called imagines, which were perfect likenesses of the family's distinguished ancestors. A long line of these ancestors, consuls, generals, senators, were thus brought back to life, marching alongside their descendant on his final journey. It was a powerful statement that this was not just the death of one man, but a momentary pause in the long, unbroken chain of a great lineage. Finally came the body, carried high on its bier, followed by the grieving family and a long train of clients and friends. The procession would wind its way to the forum, where it would stop for the funeral oration, the laudatio funebris. Here, a son or another prominent relative would stand on the rostra and deliver a formal speech, recounting the achievements, virtues, and honors of the deceased and their ancestors. It was a final accounting of a life's worth, delivered to the city and to the gods. From the forum, the procession would leave the city walls, as Roman law forbade burial within the sacred precinct of the city. In the early Republic and through much of the Empire, the preferred method of disposal was cremation. The body was placed upon a great funeral pyre, or pyre. As the flames consumed the body, the family would call out the deceased's name for the last time. After the fire had died down, the ashes and bone fragments were collected, washed in wine, and placed in a funerary urn, which would then be deposited in the family tomb. These tombs lined the great roads leading out of Rome, like the Appian Way. They were elaborate structures, designed to be seen, to be a permanent reminder of the family's presence and prestige. For poorer people who could not afford such a tomb, they would join burial societies, or collegia. Members would pay monthly dues, and in return, the society would guarantee them a proper burial and a niche for their ashes in a large, communal underground tomb, a columbarium. The desire for a proper burial was universal, as it was believed that the spirit of an unburied person could not find rest and would be doomed to wander the earth as a ghost. And what of the afterlife they were preparing for? The Roman underworld was, for most, a dreary and indistinct place. It was not the highly structured system of reward and punishment that would later be defined by Christianity. Most souls, regardless of their deeds in life, were thought to end up in a grey, shadowy realm, a world of listless spirits with no memory of their former lives. There were special places for both the exceptionally wicked, Tartarus, and the exceptionally heroic, Elysium, but the average soul's fate was one of eternal, quiet gloom. Because of this, what mattered most was not a judgment in the afterlife, but remembrance by the living. To be remembered, to have your name spoken, your tomb tended, offerings made on your behalf, was to achieve a kind of immortality. To be forgotten was the true death. And so our story of Rome concludes. It is a story of two inseparable things, the marble and the dust. The marble is the Rome of legacy, the magnificent ruins of its aqueducts and amphitheaters, the enduring logic of its laws, the foundations of its languages that are still spoken today. It is the story of an empire that shaped the Western world. But the dust is the story we have been telling tonight. It is the dust of the unpaved street, the dust of the gladiator in the arena, the dust of the farmer's field. It is the story of the individual, fragile human life, with its daily struggles for food, its reliance on family, its fear of the gods, and its quiet, often brutal, end. The marble is grand, but it is cold. The dust is humble, but it contains the warmth of 1 billion forgotten lives. Rome was both. It was a republic of laws and an empire of iron, a city of gods and a city of slaves, a civilization of breathtaking achievement built upon a foundation of everyday, unrelenting human struggle. And in that dust, the true, complex, and deeply human echo of Rome can still be found.